Yes, hold on. Let me just say something about cell phone.
I'll just leave this right here.
So I'm just gonna give you my card for your daughter, really. Like I
Oh,
do
awesome,
teaching at
thanks.
JTS sometimes.
Oh, do
So
you?
I do. So and I am called to do mentor stuff for women students there all the
Oh,
time.
really?
So I really am
A
happy
lot
to
of
like.
women now, right?
There are a lot of women.
More than men?
Depends on the class.
Uh-huh.
It's about 50-50.
Yeah, well, that's good.
The trick.
Become
The,
available.
the trick. The trick is that.
Good afternoon and welcome. I am delighted. I'm Rabbi Amy Katz, the Rabbi at Temple Beth El, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the very first Bill and Lynn Foggle Great Issues lecture series. And I wanted to invite Bill and Lynn to the Bima to share just a little bit of, to tell a little bit about this program. And Bill and Lynn have been members of this temple for more than 60 years. And it's really been their spiritual home. Their kids became bar and bat mitzvah here. This is the place that they came home. And really what I want to say to Bill and Lynn on behalf of the temple is thank you for remembering us. That even as you winter in Florida and as you explored the world, thank you for being rooted in Springfield and for loving this community the way you do, because your generosity and your vision allow us to continue to do great things, and we're deeply grateful. So I'm going to invite Bill and Lynn.
Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. As a Springfieldite, having been born, brought up here, we appreciate the synagogue. When I grew up here, there were 3 newspapers, all owned by the same company. When I went on to college, we had a compulsory course. It was called Great Issues. It was the most exciting course that I ever had. It was a compulsory course, and we had speakers from all over the world and other professors. We had no book, and we didn't have to report anything. But we had, as our books, the Wall Street Journal, the Christian Science Monitor, the Atlanta Constitution, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. This was our book, this is what we learned, and this was the most important thing, an important course we took. And we have borrowed the name because it's no longer at Dartmouth. The kids no longer want to go to a course that they don't want to go to, and the class is no longer. So we've transported it here, and we hope the future will be great. And this will be an annual program. Thank you for all of you coming.
And I'm the other half, Lynn Foggle, and I need to tell you that when we brought this dream to Rabbi Katz, we never dreamed she'd run with it as far as she did. She has been absolutely amazing. So all I'm going to do is thank Rabbi Amy Katz, Professor Josh Weiss, who has gotten a lot of you people here today, and that's very exciting. Rhoda Peskin, who had to retire after all the work she did for us. She was so exhausted. Sue Klein, who did a lot of work for us, and Larry Lipari, who I don't believe is here, which is too bad, because Larry designed our beautiful logo that will go in perpetuity along with this whole program. We've endowed it, and we hope you'll come, and your children will come, and their children all the time. Thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to have you.
So just a gentle reminder, if you have a cell phone, now would be the perfect time for you to remember to turn it off. When you came into the building, you were given note cards and there were pencils, and we thought our plan was to take the cards and go through and present Mr. Goldberg with questions, but he very quickly said, no, I like the spontaneity and the back and forth. So if you have questions, Josh and I will figure out how to call on you and invite you to ask your question, and we'll keep it lively and engaging and entertaining. But if you have the questions, it might help to just write them down anyway so that you're clear about exactly what it is you want to ask. So when we thought about doing this program, and Bill and Lynn wanted to do a Great Issues, somebody said to me, well, why would the temple be concerned about great issues? Wouldn't the temple only want to focus on Jewish issues? To which the answer, of course, is no, because to be Jewish is to have your eye in two places all the time. 2,500 years or so ago, when Jews were exiled from the land of Israel, the prophet Jeremiah said to the Jews who were exiled, seek peace and prosperity for the city in which I'm sending you, and pray to God, because if the place where you're living is prosperous, you will prosper. And really, it's from Jeremiah's advice to those who had been sent out of the land of Israel that 2,500 years ago, that mindset of, we worry about our own community because our own community is precious and really important to us. But we worry about where our community is sitting and in the place in which we're living and in how where we're living intersects and interacts with the world around it, both because as Jews we have this concern for the universal and because it affects us particular as well. So I'm really just delighted that Jeffrey Goldberg was available to join us. He has a very lengthy and interesting bio, which I hope you've had a chance to read in the program, and it's my pleasure to invite him to the bema, Jeffrey Goldberg.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you to the Foggles for sponsoring this. I realize it's a lot of responsibility being the first one. I don't want to be the last one, so I'll try not to disappoint too much. Can you all hear me? Is that all right? Yeah, so. I was once giving a speech at another Jewish event, and I came up. They introduced me, and people applauded politely, and I got up to it was a synagogue, it was in a bema, and somebody screamed out from the back, "We can't hear you." And I said, that's because I haven't started talking yet. So I just always ask this question at synagogues. So thank you very, very much for having me here. I do appreciate it. Last night I was at the White House Correspondents Association dinner, and I'm much, much happier to be here, believe me. We can talk about that when the time comes. That was quite something. That was my talk about being first and last. That was my 17th White House Correspondents Association dinner. I hope it's my last, because I hope they kill the thing off. All right, we're being live streamed, right? Oh, this is great. Now I'm just on the record as saying that I want that thing dead. That's great. We will have plenty of time for a conversation. Because this is a largely Jewish audience, I just want to note that we're not going to have Q&A. After I talk, we're going to go right to corrections. So you'll have your opportunity. I'm going to talk for probably just a few minutes and just present some broad ideas, and then open it up to a conversation, because I really would like to have this conversation driven by your questions and concerns. There's an awful lot to talk about America, its role in the world, the current president, previous president, Israel and the Middle East, situation in Korea. We can go on and on and on. The topic that was given to me by the synagogue is, and I have it here, the United States' new and controversial role in the world, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's a small topic, but this is what happens often when it's interesting. I note this anthropologically. Whenever I speak in Jewish organizations, there's always a very, very ambitious agenda. I was a few years ago. I got a call from a leader of a certain Jewish organization. I shouldn't name it, but it rhymes with Shmadasa. This person called me and asked me to come speak at her organization, and I try to be a diligent person, so I said, that's a very nice offer. I admire the organization very much. What would you like me to talk about? I said, and she said, well, our members are very, very concerned about the situations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and also the Syrian civil war, the roots of the Syrian civil war, what it means for Israel and for the United States. And of course, we're very concerned about Israel and the future of democracy there and whether it can survive a hostile environment, and also the future of democracy at all in the Middle East. And also, we're very concerned about the roots of Islamic fundamentalism. So if you could explain those, that would be great. And I said, sure, how much time do I have? And she said, 15 minutes. And then she said, listen, these are really depressing subjects, so could you try to keep it light? Yeah, that was a good one. So in the interest of keeping it light, I will tell you a joke. It's one of my 15 favorite Jewish jokes. It's cleaner than what you heard last night at the White House Correspondents Association dinner, but it's a joke. It's a joke with a purpose. Some of you know it, but just nod along like you don't know it, and don't shout out the punchline, which also occasionally happens. Imagine it's a very hot day in a bar, and a French guy runs into the bar, and he goes up to the bartender and says, "I'm so hot and tired and thirsty, I must have wine." So the bartender gives him a glass of wine. A few minutes later, a German guy runs into the bar and says, "I'm so tired and thirsty, I must have beer." So the bartender gives him a beer. A few minutes later, a Jewish guy runs in the bar and says, "I'm so tired and thirsty, I must have diabetes." I'll be here all week, by the way. You can just come. I understand there's a new casino opening. I could also go perform there if you want. The reason I love that joke so much is that it reminds me of me. To some extent, I feel like I'm that Jewish guy. I spend a lot of my time over the last couple of decades, in fact, thinking about, in terms of the Jewish people, in terms of Israel in particular, I spend a lot of time thinking about what constitutes a bothersome problem and what constitutes a serious threat, threat to the existence of the Jewish people, or the happiness and safety of the Jewish people, and the threat to the existence and happiness of the state of Israel. And part of my job, it's not only vocation, it's avocational, part of my job is to try to think through how to disaggregate these different kinds of threats, what's a mortal threat and what's not. We are an interesting people, obviously, the Jewish people. Most peoples glide through history. They come, often they go, without a preoccupation with the multiple existential threats they're facing. But in any given moment, and this is true not just in this moment, but true moments going back 2,000 or more years, the Jewish people constantly grappling with threats that imperil our very existence. And I want to talk about that a little bit later as we get into a conversation maybe about Israel and the Middle East, depending again on your interests. I want to talk just for a few minutes right now about the American crisis. The American crisis is not unrelated, of course, to the crisis that we might be facing in Israel, a crisis that we face in the American Jewish community. The American crisis is in some ways a crisis of confidence. It's a crisis of democracy. It's a crisis of Americans not liking each other very much anymore. It's interesting in trying to think through the role of America in the world. I think it's important to acknowledge at the outset that we are in decline as a country. This is not as pathological as it sounds, because we've been in decline since 1945 in a kind of way. If you think back to the moment World War II ended, America represented most of the world's economy. It was the dominant power. The Soviets rose as well from their own troubles during World War II. But it was America's world. We shared a huge amount of the security burden. We controlled much of the economy. We created the institutions that govern everything from security to trade to the safety of the sea lanes to outer space. So we've been in a gradual decline since then. in the sense that other powers have come online, some of which we've worked with and some of which were our adversaries. But we've been in a slow decline, but that decline has been managed, and we've still managed to remain the most important single player on the world stage. We also know, and this is, to be honest, not a thought that I really had until November 2016, but we also know intellectually, if not emotionally, and by we I mean me, I don't want to speak for anybody here actually, we also know that all empires rise and all empires fall. There's nothing that in the rule book of human civilization that says an empire, a country, a superpower that is on top now is going to stay on top. Every empire that we can think of, from the Roman Empire to the British Empire, has collapsed. China went through a long period in which it rose, and then it went the past couple of centuries through a period of decline. Now it's on the upswing. But there's nothing immutable about America's role in the world. And again, I say this, this is not a thought that occurred, this particular thought is a thought that occurred to me after Donald Trump, to most people's surprise, won the election. But this is not merely a commentary on the Trump presidency. Over the past 3 presidencies, in fact, we've seen different leaders contribute in different ways to this decline. Before I became editor of The Atlantic a year and a half ago, I spent most of my time covering the previous 2 presidents, George W. Bush and Barack Obama, spending quite a bit of time with them and trying to understand in particular their foreign policies, their national security policies, and the way they understood America's role in the world. George W. Bush is a fascinating case, because if you had to diagnose how he inadvertently contributed to America's declining position in the world, you would say that his contribution was to overreach. In reaction to 9/11, which is in itself a reaction to some other things, George W. Bush overreached, particularly in the Middle East, in a way that spent down our resources, sapped our morale, obviously got American soldiers killed. Not blaming him for what happened, these things don't happen alone, but in his presidency we saw the perils of overreaction and overextension, a belief, maybe a naive belief, that the world, when presented with a set of ideals that we believe in, will adopt those ideals readily. And he found out the hard way, not only in Afghanistan, but in particular in Iraq, that just because we believe something is the right thing, and we might have a good logical case to make that case, other people around the world aren't necessarily going to buy that. And so at the end of the Bush administration, we found ourselves in a period of low morale. We found ourselves in an ebb in terms of our international reputation. We found ourselves spending way too much money and putting way too many troops in a couple of places that perhaps don't really matter as much as we thought they did. Barack Obama comes in. Barack Obama, of course, is a direct reaction to George W. Bush. There's no way Barack Obama becomes president without George W. Bush before him. And if the signal flaw of the Bush administration approach to the world is overreaction, then the signal flaw of the Obama administration was underreaction, which is to say it is quite possible analytically to draw the conclusion that Barack Obama overreacted or overlearned the lessons of the Bush administration and underperformed in certain parts of the world in which American intervention was needed. This happens to be a preoccupation of mine. I was lucky enough to spend hours with Barack Obama while he was president talking about the Syria conflict in particular, but the range of American activities around the world. And Barack Obama, unlike George W. Bush, had a belief that part of the role of the president was, in a sense, to protect the world from America's best intentions. I don't think he would articulate it this way, but I think that he believed that America is such a powerful force in the world that if it stumbles around blindly and intervenes where intervention might not work, we can do more harm than good. George W. Bush and many presidents before him believed that America, as a sort of a default position, American engagement in the world was an almost axiomatic good. American involvement means that things would almost certainly get better. Barack Obama had a different philosophy. He thought to himself, American intervention can very well make things worse. We won't know, and we will never know, what would have happened had we intervened early in Syria. There's a very good chance things would have gotten better. There's also a good chance that things would have gotten worse. And that period that we went through, the Obama administration, was kind of a clarifying period because we saw two models, one after the other, of American leadership and American intervention. Both of those models had their flaws. Now we come to the current president. And now I'm about to find out how many Trump supporters there are in the room. George W. Bush had a philosophy, and he had a strategy. You might argue with the philosophy, you might argue with the strategy. Barack Obama had a philosophy, and he had a strategy. You might argue with the philosophy, you might argue with the strategy. Donald Trump lacks a strategy. He lacks knowledge of history. And in particular, he lacks something that both the previous presidents and presidents stretching back into the mists of time, what Donald Trump doesn't have is a sense of America's best role in the world, a sense that America has responsibilities in the world other than mercantile responsibilities, a sense that America plays a useful role not only through the application of hard power, invading countries or defeating the Nazis or defeating the Japanese, but the moral example, the soft power of America, is something worth preserving and defending. I'm going to stick with the frame that the rabbi and the committee gave me, the good, the bad, the ugly. I found that very, very enticing. Because I can talk through in a few minutes some of the aspects of the Donald Trump phenomenon through the prism of America's place in the world at the moment. I think it's fair to say, you are fair to assume that I believe that Donald Trump is accelerating the decline of American stature and American influence in the world. I will stipulate that, and we can have that argument in a few minutes if you want. But I think it is fair to say the following, that when Donald Trump does something good, in fairness, we have to acknowledge that he's done something good. Right after the election, the morning after the election, and many of you, I'm sure, remember that night when you saw the various dials and various websites and TV stations move from 90% to 80% to about 2% to no percent. I remember thinking to myself, I'm a journalist, so I'm predisposed to try to predict things that I don't know anything about. I remember telling myself about midnight, never predict anything again. Just don't bother predicting anything again, because it was surprising. But I remember coming to very, very early conclusions about what the role of journalism should be. And the next morning, I gathered our whole staff up, and I talked about the coming period, the period in which we find ourselves. And I said, we didn't have the term resistance yet. That came up probably a week or two later. The idea that Americans of liberal intentions should band together and act almost as if the French in Paris in World War II and resist the autocrat who's coming into power. I told our staff, I said, you know, our mission is to observable truth. And so when this president-elect does something worthy of respect or worthy of analytical credit, we're going to give it to him. Too much of the media, in my opinion, has moved right into the resistance camp, which means that they've given up, to some degree, analysis in favor of partisanship. So that said, I think we have to be open to the possibility that Donald Trump can achieve on the world stage some good outcomes. Obviously, and I already have some questions from you all about Korea. I don't happen to think that this is going to work, and we could talk about that in a minute. But I'm glad that Donald Trump has moved from a discourse of fire and fury to a discourse of believing that it's possible for an American president, in particular this American president, to negotiate a deal on the Korean Peninsula. I don't believe it's going to work for the very simple reason that any dictator, I'm trying to imagine yourselves as dictators. Those of you who are on the synagogue board probably know what I'm talking about already. Imagine yourself a dictator who saw what happened to Saddam Hussein because he didn't have nuclear weapons. Remember, the flip side of the WMD debate is that Saddam very much wished he had nuclear weapons and was lying about not having them in order to protect himself in the Middle East. If Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons in 2003, we never would have invaded. And there's a very good chance that he'd be alive right now. He would be 81, in fact, and still in power in Iraq. Remember what happened to Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi, in order to gain entrance back into civilization, gave up his nuclear program. He was soon after overthrown and shot to death in a ditch. If you're the leader of North Korea, and you're not an idiot, and let's suppose that he's not an idiot, you look around the world and say, dictators who have nuclear weapons get to stay in power, and dictators who don't have nuclear weapons don't get to stay in power. I can't imagine a situation in which the president of South Korea or the American president convinced the North Koreans to give up their nuclear arsenal and their nuclear capability. But, like I said, there's something to be said for a president who is willing to try, and so it's in the best interest of the United States and its allies that Donald Trump succeed. I mean, it is, by the way, I'll just make this as an open parenthetical, it would be, I was going to say, it would be an improbable end to the TV show we're watching, but everything about the TV show we've been watching for a year and a half has been improbable. But it really would be an improbable end to this TV show if Donald Trump gets a Nobel Peace Prize. That's going to be some speech, by the way, too. That's going to, believe me, that's going to be a speech. But we should all be hoping for that because it's better than the alternative. Middle East peace. He's appointed his son-in-law to lead the Middle East peace charge. I first heard that. I know Jared a little bit. He's a very nice young man. He doesn't know more about the Middle East than professional Middle East peace negotiators. And at first I thought it was kind of an odd and egotistical choice to put your son-in-law in charge of Middle East peacemaking. I would say this for that, though. In the Middle East, and remember, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the people you're actually dealing with, not the way we think in the East Coast of the United States. In the Middle East, this was taken as a very, very serious sign. When you're a Middle Easterner and the President of the United States is sending the father of his grandchildren to talk to you, you understand that differently than a hired gun Secretary of State. You understand that this is a personal emissary, a family emissary from the President who is talking to you directly through, the President is talking to you directly through his son-in-law. And so there is power in that. There's also power in the observation that nobody else has succeeded in bringing about Middle East peace. And so we have to be open to the idea that Donald Trump could do what no other American president has been able to do, no Secretary of State has been able to do, which is to bring about a permanent settlement to the Israeli-Arab conflict. If you're asking what I would bet on this, I would bet no money on this. But not necessarily because of the involvement of Donald Trump and Jared Kushner. I'd bet no money on this because I don't think that peace is actually possible at this moment in history. But nevertheless, it's very, very encouraging that the President is behaving in this way on this issue. There are other things that I think you can actually say, you know, Donald Trump is directionally correct. A couple of years ago, I interviewed President Obama and quoted him in an article saying that he was perturbed, and that's sort of the strongest language he would ever use, mildly perturbed at the fact that America's NATO allies don't pay enough to support the common defense. Donald Trump's position on this is not new. He expresses it in a more flamboyant way than the previous president or previous presidents, but there is nothing axiomatically wrong with an American president going to our allies and saying, you know what, our taxpayers since 1945 have carried much of the burden of your defense on their backs. And you know what, you could kick in a little bit more. It's quite another thing to question the efficacy or the utility or the moral purpose of NATO and all of these alliances, these democratic, Western-oriented alliances, but there's nothing necessarily wrong with questioning why people aren't paying. The same goes for trade. I mean, absolutely, there's nothing holy about our trade our devotion to free trade. There's nothing wrong with the president asking hard questions about whether or not we are actually getting fair deals in all of these agreements. He doesn't go about it in a way that I find useful, but these are interesting questions. So I'll put that in a basket and say there's some possibilities here that Donald Trump will achieve good things for the United States and its allies. The bad, just about everything else. We could park that over here. The bad is serious. The bad is a disposition on the part of this president who's sort of the least democratically oriented, I mean small d democratically oriented president we've ever had. His not only sympathy but almost veneration for dictators and despots and corrupt monarchies across the world, but in the Middle East especially, is quite troubling if you believe that America is more than just its mercantile and security interests. If you believe that we are supposed to be a shining city on a hill, then his devotion to strong men is quite troubling. There's obviously questions of character and disposition and stability. I would very much like to believe that the president is, as he has described himself, a very stable genius. There's a set of proofs to indicate that that might not be wholly true, and you don't necessarily want a president. Remember, the president is a democratically elected leader who's an absolute nuclear monarch. I could explain that later if you want, but it's a very simple concept. The president is sole possessor and has sole control over our nuclear arsenal. You don't necessarily want somebody who is so easily flummoxed and angered by things he sees on morning television. You would like to think that this is a person of even disposition and analytical rigor and will make decisions about the deployment of U.S. forces and the use of nuclear weapons in mature, stable ways. If you were to look through across the 327 million people who comprise the United States of America, you could probably find many people who seem more stable and less ego-driven and less impulsive than Donald Trump. So there's a whole category of things here that are quite bad and quite dangerous. Obviously, his relationship with Russia, which is being excavated as we speak, is perhaps the most challenging subject of all. Collusion or no collusion, it seems abundantly clear that the KGB agent, who's the current president of Russia, believed early on that Donald Trump would serve Russia's interests in Washington in a way that Hillary Clinton wouldn't. And we have to think through that and think through the implications of that very, very carefully. We're learning more and more about this, and we'll continue to learn more about this every day, but it is obviously incredibly troubling. The ugly, I come back to 1945. When we defeated the Japanese and the Germans at the same time, which was a signal achievement. I mean, that was, without America's role in that, fascism would have won. We know what the consequences of the Jews would be, but we also understand what the consequences for the Enlightenment, for democratic ideals. We understand all of those consequences. Since 1945, the United States has stood, very imperfectly, I will give you, but stood for a certain set of ideals in the world. People around the world look to America for aid and comfort and for a level of idealism that they don't find in other countries. International relations is not as complicated as people who practice international relations would have you believe, in the following sense. We face, right now, but we've faced situations like this for decades, we face situations in which now let me reframe it. There are three regions of the world that are indispensably important to the United States: the Middle East, Europe, and East Asia. Right? For a set of economic and security reasons, those are the regions that count the most. America has, for decades, filled roles in all of those regions. We have filled those roles imperfectly, sometimes tragically, the Middle East in particular, but we have filled the role of playing the part of a Western democratic country that, even when it's hypocritical, is still trying very often to do the right thing for people, for citizens of our own country and for citizens of other countries. If the United States were to withdraw, if we were to follow Donald Trump's lead toward a kind of quasi-isolationism, take East Asia. Nature and international relations both abhor vacuums. If we were to leave East Asia, China fills the gap. If we were to leave Europe, Russia fills that gap. If we leave the Middle East, Iran and the combination of Sunni extremist groups fill that gap. We don't really have a choice, and the reason we don't have a choice is not only because it's not in our own security interest to leave these places vacuums. It's not in the interest of the things that we hold dear to and believe in, the democratic ideals of the American Constitution, the American Declaration of Independence. This is the ugly side. The ugly side is that I'm not sure America can continue to play the role that it's played since 1945 in the world when it's led by a president who doesn't understand or value the role that it has played. We have 2.5 more years, and then possibly 4 more years after that. I don't know if we can continue to do this. What we are doing is we are engaged in an intentional exercise of accelerated decline. I know this sounds depressing, but I think this is where we are. And from my perspective, it's a shame. Like I said, I'm fully cognizant of all of the mistakes the United States has made across the world stage in the last 70 or 80 years. But I always ask myself, I don't judge America against an ideal, I judge it against what would take its place if America withdrew from those roles. And I think that most of you would agree with me that some combination of China, Russia, and Iran playing the roles, or trying to play the roles that America now plays, would not be good for us, and would not be good for the advancement of humanity. And so that's where we find ourselves at this moment, and I could, as you can tell, talk for hours, but I'm going to stop, and I'm going to open it up for questions. I can start with questions here, or I can just ask you, so this is the part where I ask myself questions, by the way. I'll go right with this one. And then please just jump in soon, because I don't want to talk to myself up here all day. Do you think some of the comments at the correspondence dinner were over the top inappropriate? Where do you draw the line for appropriateness? That was a kind of a weird dinner. Did any of you watch it? So I'm never actually sure if normal Americans care. Yes? No? Maybe? Gossip, right? No, it's become this Frankenstein monster of a dinner, because you can't, it's supposed to be, it has the feeling of like a high school graduation ceremony and a Kiwanis meeting, like the Wednesday Kiwanis meeting at the Corkin board, and then a bunch of cabinet secretaries and journalists dressed up in inappropriate ways, and mixing in a comic with this earnest kind of gathering of journalists is usually a recipe for disaster. And it was more so this year because the president didn't come, and because there's so much anger in America, as represented by this comedian who came. She had some good lines, by the way. It was just not, I guess I would say, it was not a great look for the media to gather in this place and sit there and laugh at these jokes. I'm not saying the jokes weren't funny, but you can take a person who is very funny in a downtown comedy club is not necessarily funny on the Bima on Yom Kippur. And I'm not equating the correspondence dinner to Yom Kippur, because the food is worse at the correspondence dinner. But it really was not a good look. And I go back to this notion that I expressed before, which is the role of a journalist in this unusual moment when you're dealing with a president the likes of which we have never seen. You don't want to just join the political resistance. You want to continue to play the role of journalist. But on the other hand, you don't want to be seen cozying up to power either. And it's a thin line. And how you view that line depends on where you sit. There's no true objectivity in that. But for the sake of decorum and for the sake of the perception that we're unfair people, we should probably stay away from things like that. That's what I would say. Why don't I just open it up to questions, and I'll just, sure. Do you want me to just call on people randomly? Yeah, go ahead, sir. Right. Well, I mean, it's not a secret to say that most journalists in the quote-unquote mainstream media probably lean liberal. It's also fair to say, I think, that most can separate out their personal feelings from the way they report. But we all know that unconscious bias affects the way you approach the world. You know, we had a problem 2 years ago when Donald Trump became a serious candidate. Because the truth is that he does lie in ways that are unusual, even by the standards of politics, which is to say, there are observable lies. You know, we started on the very first day of his administration with the crowd size issue. That's just a math problem, and he got the math problem wrong. You know, and most presidents would, when corrected on a math problem, say, all right, I was wrong about my math problem. But Donald Trump plows right through. So you know, you have people, and I'm sure there are people here who felt the media was too hard on him in the run-up to the election, and people who felt he was too soft. To be fair to the quote-unquote mainstream media, we've never encountered someone who, when called out on an obvious lie, doubles down on it. And not only that, but inverses the formula so that we're the fake news, and he's presenting the real news. I mean, it's a much deeper, I mean, in a religion that's built around the idea that there's truth, this is an interesting topic for many sermons. But it is an interesting and fraught moment, I think, in the life of a country that believes ostensibly in Enlightenment values. Enlightenment value meaning that there is empirical truth, that every thought system is open to critique, right? It is a kind of strange moment when you have a president who doesn't play by those same rules. I don't know. I mean, I think, well, I'll put it this way. The question that I get most often from people is, how do you convince the 30 to 40% of Americans who seem to believe whatever Trump is saying, no matter what, that, well, here's a set of observable facts that disprove your position, and they don't care. And I don't have an answer for that. I think about it a lot. The real danger is that we're becoming two countries, one that has a certain set of facts and another that has another set of facts. And technology is driving this split, and technology is going to drive it faster and faster. And so I think we are, I mean, I'm not here to make you, as you can tell already, I'm not here to make you happy about anything. I think we are heading into a period of time in which the fundamental unity of America is going to come under stress in a way that it hasn't come under stress since the 1850s. I'm not saying it's going to end up where we ended up in the 1860s, but because I'm not doing the prediction game. But we do have a retribalization of America in ways aided by technology, aided by a president who didn't read the handbook that's left in the Oval Office that says, you've won, now you're the president of everyone. Just didn't get that. I mean, not that all presidents have done that well, but all presidents have at least paid lip service to that idea. This is not to absolve the media of all of its fault. I want to be very careful when you talk about the press and the media. The media is the New York Times and Breitbart and MSNBC and Fox and The Guardian and The Atlantic and the Temple Beth El newsletter. a well-known source of truth, obviously. And so, we have to be careful when we talk about what the media is. We don't get together and decide the common media line, and most of us can't stand the other ones anyway. So it's a very fractious community, if it's a community at all. There was a question over here, and then I'm going to get lost quickly, but I'll come over here and then over there. The question was about Pompeo and Bolton and what role they're going to play in the administration, whether they're more extreme or whether they're going to bring some good experience. I think the answer is yes. There's a question over here. No. I'll give you 2 more sentences because you paid the ticket price. They're professionals. I know them both a little bit. And, the important role for a national security advisor is to referee, is not to sort of present his or her own views, but to gather up the views of other people in the administration and present them to the president. It is a larger challenge because this president has a short attention span. I'm not being snarky, I'm just being observational. And so there's some unique, Barack Obama read all the briefing books. Sometimes it didn't work, but he read them. So if Bolton plays that role, then there's a good chance that that he'll play a useful role. Remember one other thing. It's very easy to sit in a think tank or go on afternoon television and sit in one of those CNN panels and, bang the table and say, well, what we need to do in Korea is X. It's another thing to actually go do it, especially when you're talking about starting a war. Pompeo, it's one of the oddest collapses in recent executive branch history is the collapse of Rex Tillerson, who ran one of the largest and most complicated companies in the world, but couldn't figure out how to adapt to another job. He treated it as the same sort of job. So he was remarkably ineffective. Pompeo is a hawkish guy, but again, he might actually use his hawkishness with Donald Trump to the benefit of some non-hawkish solutions. And by the way, I'm not derogating hawkishness. I'll come back to where's the potential good in the Donald Trump approach to the world. It could be argued that one of the problems that we faced in the Middle East during the Obama administration, especially vis-a-vis Iran, was that no one was actually scared of Barack Obama. No one thought that Barack Obama would actually attack them. Now, he was very, very strong on terrorism. He killed a lot of people in Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But Iran and other countries like that, Syria, obviously, never felt that he posed a threat. It is very, very useful sometimes to have a president and a team around the president who scare the hell out of people who don't like America. There's something to be said for that. There was a question here. I'm going to come back to the women in blue in a second. But there's a concept called the crazy Nixon approach to foreign policy. Henry Kissinger invented this. Basically, Henry Kissinger would go to foreign leaders or adversaries and say, look, you and I both know how to fix this and we could do it rationally, but I got to tell you, the guy I work for is a little bit crazy. And, it was good cop, bad cop. And if you don't go down the pathway that I'm suggesting, I don't know what that guy's going to do. But the whole effectiveness, the efficacy of the crazy Nixon approach was that Nixon couldn't actually be crazy. Like the whole thing is predicated on that it's an act. And so this goes back to this fundamental question about stability, which is, is the president making reasoned judgments based on a fact set that's presented to him, or is he making judgments based on his own feelings and predispositions and things that make him angry? So it is good to have hawkish people around. It's also good to have very, very, very sane people around at the same time. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry, blue. Well, and then, okay, we'll go to you also. You're wearing blue. That's not fair. And we'll do both of you, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. It's not new. It's worse than ever. I mean, part of it is a downstream effect of Donald Trump taking over the Republican Party. I mean, colonizing the minds of Republicans who, from a certain viewpoint, should know better. You know, I mean, the Donald Trump phenomenon couldn't happen without a whole set of things, but it couldn't be happening now if he didn't have the acquiescence of a Republican-led Congress. Congress is hyper-partisan. It's really more about tribe than about playing the oversight role, or the advising, the balancing role that it's supposed to play. Congress has ceased to become an independent branch of government in many ways. The presidency has become too powerful, it's too imperial, and that is okay from a sort of a procedural standpoint when you have somebody who's understated and rational and not given to extreme behavior. It gets a little bit dicey when you don't have that. I cannot explain it except to call it an abdication of leadership. I think most people in America, Congress is held in very low esteem in part because it does not play that checking role that it is meant to play. You know, this question always comes up. What will Donald Trump have to do to bring about the criticism, the sustained criticism of the leaders of his party? I mean, this is a party in which, you know, if you recall about, well, what is it, a year and a half or 2 years ago, Donald Trump was mocking the physical characteristics of Ted Cruz's wife. And Ted Cruz is now a supporter of Donald Trump. I mean, and I'm not just picking on Ted Cruz here, although I am picking on Ted Cruz. But it's the behaviors of certain people are mysteries to me because I'm pretty sure that if someone had publicly mocked the appearance of my wife, I would not then turn around and become a supporter of that person. I'm not saying that I'm a wonderful husband or a stalwart individual or whatever. It just seems bizarre to me that people would take all that abuse and then come around and support this person. They know, polls are showing them, internal polling is showing the Republicans what's going to happen to them. We don't know. I'm not going to predict what's going to happen in November, but the trend lines aren't good for the Republicans. And yet they are so fearful of their base, of the base. Every district, every Republican congressional district has a majority of people who are still with Trump, and you see what happens to Republicans, Flake, Bob Corker from Tennessee. You see what happens to them when they go up against Donald Trump. They're forced into retirement. So you have a fear cycle going on as well. And why don't we do that one? And then I'll come over here to you, sir. And maybe you want to pick them because I'm going to make enemies. Actually, I'm leaving so I can make the enemies. You're not leaving. Yeah. Jared Kushner's role. Is that what you said? Yeah, the question was, what would it take to, what are the conditions that are precluding peace from being made between the Israelis and the Palestinians? Is that fair? Like, why can't, why, I said that it wasn't possible right now, why I believe that. On the Israeli side, you have a very right-wing government that has shown in its behavior that it is not interested in trying to even meet the minimal demands of moderate Palestinians. I'm not just talking about the settlements and the continued expansion of the settlements, but I'm talking about that. But I also believe that one of the tragedies of the settlement movement is that it obscures the true nature of the Middle East conflict. And beneath or underneath the fights over settlements, the fights over Jerusalem, the fights over an embassy in Jerusalem, there's a fundamental problem, which is that most of the Palestinians, or much of the Palestinian political entity, and certainly most of the Palestinian leaders, and across the Muslim world, most Muslims have not reconciled themselves to a set of facts that are fundamental for a lot of people in this room. A, that the Jews are a people, that the Jews are a people from a particular place, that these Jews who are from this particular place have a right to a nation state of their own in at least part of their ancestral homeland, and that and unless and until you have a cognitive shift in the thinking of people who are opposing Israel right now, you're not going to create conditions for a peace process. What's happened is it cycles. Israel becomes more and more right-wing the more it realizes that there's nobody to actually deal with on the other side. On the other side, the politics have been remarkably consistent, I think, for a set of political and theological and cultural and behavioral reasons. There are a lot of people on the Muslim side who find it very, very hard to agree that Israel should be allowed to exist. And you have to start the analysis with that. People blame the settlements, and I have a huge critique of the settlements, and I have a huge critique of the current Israeli government, some past Israeli governments, but the settlements are a 47-year-old or 46-year-old problem, right? And it's not possible for a 46-year-old problem to cause a 100-year-old conflict. It just doesn't work in the time-space continuum. This goes back, opposition to the existence of this, opposition to the existence of Israel goes back well before Israel existed. And so I don't see enough change on that front. And I don't believe that, there's this formula, well, the Arabs don't have to recognize Israel's right to exist. They could just recognize the reality of its existence. I don't think that that's a formula for long-term stability. The Obama administration tried a certain pathway, which was to, which had the result of raising Palestinian expectations. Raising Palestinian expectations turns out to have been not a great diplomatic ploy, because when you raise someone's expectations, they continue to build expectations until the point where you can't meet those expectations anymore. So I don't think things are possible. The fundamental Israeli dilemma, I don't mean to go on a mini whatever about this, but the rabbi's going, yeah, go on a mini whatever about this. The fundamental problem for Israel, and it's a good time to talk about it, Israel's 70. A lot of people, people older than me, maybe my age, didn't think that it could possibly even make it to this point, right? Every year it gets stronger, which is sort of the miracle of the whole enterprise. It can't stay in the West Bank, and it can't leave the West Bank. That's the fundamental problem for Israel right now. My critique of the Prime Minister, among other critiques, is that he's not grappling with that. Just because there's no obvious solution doesn't mean it doesn't obviate the need for a leader to come up with something that might work at least part of the way. And so Israel's democratic nature or its Jewish majority are both under threat right now, and the Israeli government acts as if it can go on forever like this, and I don't think it can. But there was a person who was, yes, sir. And then, I'm sorry, I'll come over there, yeah.
How will the shift from the embassy to Jerusalem affect the peace process?
The question is about the Jerusalem embassy issue, how it will affect the peace process. It won't really affect the peace process. There was this, this is something that I guessed right on. When Trump announced that they would move the embassy, everybody said, oh, the streets will flow with blood across the Middle East, and it's going to become World War III, and of course it didn't. One of the things you have to remember about a lot of ostensible supporters of the Palestinians is they don't care that much. They definitely oppose the idea of Israel, but they don't really care that much about the Palestinians and their causes. The Palestinians themselves didn't react with violence and fury. It's a very hard issue to understand as a controversy when you actually think about it. And I don't know how it became actually interested in figuring this out. I don't know how it became such a controversy. The Knesset has been in Jerusalem since virtually the founding of the state. The Prime Minister's office, the Supreme Court. It is the capital of Israel. Israel calls it the capital of Israel. I personally, I mean, I'm saying this personally from a Jewish perspective. I don't need Donald Trump or anyone else to tell me that the capital of Israel is Jerusalem. The capital of Israel is Jerusalem. You know, part of Zionism is sort of taking control of your own narrative in a kind of way, not waiting for the non-Jews to tell you what you can and cannot do or can and cannot be. Whether it should be moved right now or not, there's an interesting debate about that. But everyone knows that West Jerusalem is where the Israeli capital is, and everybody who believes still in a two-state solution as possibly the best of a series of bad options understands that East Jerusalem will be the capital of Palestine whenever it gets born. And so this does seem to me a big ado about not very much. But it won't actually affect the possibility of peace. In fact, it could have the opposite effect, which is to say, whenever the Palestinians see an American president leaning a little bit toward the Palestinian narrative in negotiations, they ask for more. Maybe, and again, this is in the category of who knows. Maybe they will look at Trump and this move of the embassy and say, you know what, we're not getting a free ride here. We might want to try to make a deal. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who I interviewed a few weeks ago, is a very interesting guy and a very modern guy. Speaking for, I mean, he's been saying privately, and some of it's leaking out, he's been saying privately that the Palestinians have blown, sounds like Bibi, the Palestinians have blown opportunity after opportunity to get a state, and Arab leadership across the Middle East is getting a little tired of the Palestinians and their lack of negotiating savvy, or their desire to hold out for a perfect solution rather than take an imperfect solution. That's a long way of saying that you'll hear a lot in the coming weeks, especially when Jared goes to cut the ribbon at the new... It's a strange world, isn't it? You'll hear a lot of talk about this, but I don't think it doesn't preclude peace and it doesn't advance peace. It's just a thing that is. Wait, I wanted to go over there and then I'll come over around here. Yeah, I'm going to come to you in a minute. Yes, sir. That's impossible. I used to work at the New Yorker. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, the second question was about General Mattis, Secretary Mattis. The first question was about the sort of moderate Arab alliance lined up against Iran. Is that correct? Fair? General Mattis is interesting. He's a survivor. He doesn't say anything sort of publicly. He doesn't say anything. And that's the way you sort of keep your job. I think also, it is really actually true that when Donald Trump heard that General Mattis's nickname was Mad Dog, he said, I want to hire that guy. Because, he's always, I think this is just so common an observation, it's banal. He doesn't hire for his cabinet, he casts it. And then it's a show. And we got to have Mad Dog. And Mattis hates the term Mad Dog anyway, but yeah, chaos was his call sign, yeah. But he's an interesting guy. He's a very thoughtful guy. He plays an interesting role. But remember General Mattis was the guy who was fired by Obama for being too hawkish on Iran. So if there's an extent to the, how moderate he is. He believes that Iran deserves a good smack. He's a Marine. And you know how Marines feel about Iran. They killed 241 Marines in Lebanon a long time ago, but in Marine history, it's nothing. On the larger question of the Arabs, and look, the best scenario for actual Palestinian-Israeli peace or some kind of breakthrough is that the Israelis understand that in order to come out of the closet with the Arabs, that they have to do something with the Palestinians. And what I mean by come out of the closet is that there is in the Middle East a Jewish-Sunni alliance lined up against a Shia alliance led by Iran. Right? The Arab and Israeli interests are perfectly aligned now. Iran is the threat to a lesser but still significant extent. Sunni extremism is a threat. But you have a belt, right, from UAE and Bahrain through Saudi Arabia into Jordan to Israel into Egypt of countries that all believe the exact same thing, that Iran is the existential threat to their nations and to their governments. And so, you know, the Arabs, of course, hope that Israel does the heavy fighting when the time comes. And that may very well be the case. We might be looking at, later this year, a very large war between Iran and Israel, Iran operating from Lebanon and Syria, directly and through its Hezbollah proxy. And the question remains is how much will the Arabs actually do besides rooting on the Jews? But the Middle East has become a very, very strange place in which the Arab leadership of these moderate states, so-called moderate states, understands that their crucial ally is the Jewish state. That doesn't mean that people who live in these places like Israel. It doesn't mean that these leaders even like Israel, but it's the Middle East, and the oldest cliche in the Middle East, of course, is, you know, your enemy's enemy. So it'll be interesting to see if they do anything together. But they already work under the table. They already work together in a big way. I'll come over there in a minute, but there was somebody, I don't know, I give up. Yes, sir, and then I'll go back there and then over here. How about that?
What is your overview on ISIS and Taliban and how effective are we in that?
ISIS and the Taliban, how effective we are in combating them. We've taken most of their territory, but they'll spring up again. This is a 100-year situation. You know, cooperation among the Europeans, the Arabs, and the U.S. is pretty high. The U.S. has done a good job, I think. This is initiated by Obama, almost completed by Trump. The danger of Trump is that he's going to declare victory early over ISIS and leave again. Our classic pattern is we do something effective in the Middle East and then we run away. It's basically because of it's almost genetic. It's in the sort of the American genes not to be an imperialist. We never, I mean, I was in, you know, I read a lot of British history, British imperial history. I was in Iraq in 2003 in the invasion. All the Americans wanted to do, all the, you know, soldiers we were with, and the leaders, all they want to do is go home. You know, we never actually want to stay and occupy anything. So the danger here is that we'll defeat ISIS and then immediately run back. And if you're ISIS, if you're the Taliban, you kind of know now that the American pattern of behavior is have a quick victory, go home. So we just wait underground and then go forward. So I don't expect that it's going to be solved anytime soon. This gentleman was raising his hand for like the last half hour. I'm not predicting that. The question is, where's the Republican Party going? I mean, both parties seem to be, well, the Republicans seem to be in a quicker motion toward collapse than the Democrats. But both, I mean, this is what's happened. I mean, it's very simple, and this is you've hit upon the core dilemma for Americans right now. We used to have a system that rewarded compromise. We used to have a system that rewarded cross-party or bipartisan cooperation. It used to be a positive when a Republican leader and a Democratic leader would do something in Congress together for various reasons. And you could date this to the rise of Newt Gingrich in some ways. what used to be a virtue was then began to be understood as a vice. You could even relate it to the Bork hearings too. To be fair, you kids look that up. Something that happened in the past, far distant past. But the system is coming apart to the point where no Democrat will be seen with a Republican president, and no Republican will be seen with a Democratic president. It's gerrymandering. It's the siloing effects of social media. It's the realization that you can win zero-sum politics games if you destroy your opponents. But the upshot is the Republican Party distills itself to its base, its current base. And the upshot is also that the Democratic Party does this. I mean, this is to me, the more interesting fight over the next couple of years is the Democratic Party become the party of Bernie Sanders, or is it the party of what remains of what we think of as moderate Democrats? The energy is on the Bernie Sanders side. Has interesting consequences, by the way, for Israel and Middle East policy, but that's a separate subject. And so the devolution is happening, and like a lot of people, I'm not an expert on this. I need to read a lot more about it, but I do wonder at a certain point when we actually have a viable third party, because there's a middle now. I mean, if you're a moderate Republican, or the way we understood moderate Republicans of 10 or 15 years ago, the people who were associated with the Bush family, for instance, they've got no home. I mean, there's certainly, I'm not even talking about Joe Lieberman Democrats on the other hand, on the other side of the fence. I'm talking about just non-economic populists, non-Elizabeth Warrens, on the Democrat side. Where do they go? I mean, and it's interesting. The problem of centrists is that they're very moderate and they do this thing, well, on the one hand, on the other hand, and I don't know, and let's go out to eat, and whatever, I mean, they don't have, it's very hard to be fanatical about your complicated views, right? And so the parties become repositories of just one viewpoint, and they become more and more, I use the word messianic advisedly, but they become a little bit more messianic in their goals and in their belief that their opponents are not fellow Americans with whom they disagree, but are evil. And so politics is devolving in a fast and terrible way. Yeah, you had your hand up for a while. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. Yes.
Do you see any threat with the rise of the white supremacists and the comments that have been made by the Trump administration during the Charlottesville problem?
Yes.
And also with
I hate Nazis. Yeah. Yeah. It's not a good look for Jewish organizations, that's for sure. The question is about the rise of white supremacy and this kind of weird, correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of tacit alliance between some people who, well, put it this way, between right-wing supporters of Israel and people who, and this is a group of people in America, people who don't like Jews but like Israel, or they don't like Jews but they like the idea of Israel. It seems to me, this goes to a big question, and I'll answer it at some length because I just don't know who to pick over here. No, I really don't. I won't answer it at length, but it goes to a really serious question about what's happened to Israel as a bipartisan issue, as a bipartisan country, as a country that derives bipartisan support in Congress and outside of Congress. You do have, there's a whole group of I think, right-wing Republicans who do admire Israel for reasons that, on a personal level, I'm not so comfortable with. And they don't very much like Jews. I mean, yes, to answer your first part of the question, the rise of white nationalism or alt-right or neo-Nazis, whatever you want to call it, is obviously troubling in a time when working class whites in particular, but not just working class whites, feel under threat from demographic changes and all of the rest of the changes that we're experiencing, it obviously becomes tribalization leads to extremism, and extremists need out groups. And traditionally, and really traditionally, like for the last 2,000 years, we, the Jews, have been a classic target of extremists. So that is one problem. The other problem is that the Israeli government and some of its supporters in America seem to believe that they should take support from wherever they get it, even if it's pretty disreputable. Even if the majority of American Jews look at certain kinds of people and say, "Oh, that don't smell so good." And it's a problem because it's a morally compromising problem. It's a political problem because it drives people from the center and the left away from Israel as a cause. I mean, the alliance, I understand why Bibi makes an alliance with Trump for a series of security reasons and political reasons, but Benjamin Netanyahu has done a pretty good job of alienating liberals in America from the idea that Israel is a cause worth supporting. It's even affecting, I'm not even talking about what's happening in the non-Jewish world, it affects college-age Jews to a large degree. And the saving grace of Israel in Washington over the last 40 or so years has been that it has support among liberal Democrats and conservative Republicans. And a prime minister who doesn't pay attention, we've never seen an Israeli prime minister who didn't pay attention to that and care for that bipartisan relationship and care for that ideal. And so it really is amazing the number of things that are completely new in the way our politics are operating, our broad politics, Jewish politics, Israel politics. It's really quite amazing the period we're in. It's interesting, but it's also extremely fraught and nerve-wracking. Yeah, yes, sir. And then I'll try to get a woman. Yes, right there.
Do you have any, it sounds like you're not satisfied with the president. Do you have any ideal method of changing things?
I'm a journalist. I don't have to go think about that. I mean, I'll answer analytically. You know, impeachment is really hard. I mean, if Congress does flip, well, you know, we're looking at some interesting months in 2019. And impeachment is also bad for the country. This is a generic observation. We're not a parliamentary democracy. We're supposed to be more stable than a parliamentary democracy. And the way we keep ourselves stable is we pick somebody to be president for 4 years. We make it very, very hard to kick out that person. But you know, the temptation to go for impeachment would be great. There's another question, you know, which is, let's say these investigations keep rolling the way they do. What's the greatest mystery in America? You know, what was in Michael Cohen's office? Could be some interesting stuff in Michael Cohen's office. But again, this goes back to the question, you know, Robert Mueller is not going to indict the president. You don't indict the president. What you do is you present your findings to the people and to the Congress. It's not up to the Justice Department. I mean, this is tradition. You could technically, but you're not going to, even at the end of the day, if he has very, very strong evidence to support collusion or corruption, this is a political matter. You don't treat the presidency as a criminal, the behavior of the president as necessarily a criminal matter. It's up to the people's representatives in Congress to decide that somebody is no longer fit to lead. And so it could be a very, very ugly. It could be a very ugly couple of years. Could be ugly couple of years anyway. You know, and I say this analytically without a thumb on the scale in any direction. There are a lot of smart people who say that we should change the president at the ballot box. When you're dissatisfied with the president, switch him out. But that's a long time between now and then. Yes, ma'am. I want to go to the woman here. Thanks.
Can you comment on the weekly so-called peaceful protests in Gaza and how the narrative seems to be taking hold that these are justified protests that Israel is the aggressor somehow?
Yeah.
How do you frame that?
The question was about the Gaza protests. It's interesting because this is not. On one level, it's completely unambiguous. This is a 67 border of Israel. right? You have Hamas on one side of the border telling its followers, Hamas, which believes and argues for the destruction of the state of Israel, right? Telling its followers to go push through this security barrier, push through this fence, and reoccupy or retake Israel. It's as simple is. The only thing I would say is I would really like for Israel to come up to devise more effective and less lethal means of keeping these people out. But there's no. This to me is not like the settlement issue. This is not one of these optional mistakes. This is not an own goal, not an unforced error. The people, and I covered them for years. I know the people who run Hamas. I know exactly what they want, and they want the Jews dead or gone. And they are literally pushing young men up into this fence and trying to break through this fence into Israel. And there's no country in the world that would not stop people trying to literally invade their country. I mean, it's just not. It's a very tough one because I think the Israelis have used stupid tactics. I mean, I was in the first uprising. I make it sound like I was a Palestinian in the first uprising. Yeah, there's stuff you don't know about me. No, I was in the army in the Israeli army in the first uprising, and one of the things you'd like Israel to do better is to do a little bit more predictive intelligence. And so, I mean, by the time I got into the army, they had figured out some non-lethal ways of dealing with demonstrators and rioters and whatnot. And I never was put in a position where I had to use lethal force against anybody, and God knows I didn't want to. But at the very beginning, it was, they are understaffed and overwhelmed, and so they would just shoot a bunch of people. And, you do think to yourself, guys, can you just dig a big ditch, and make it impossible for people to do what they're doing? But, one of the things that Israel is bad at is explaining itself. And this is the problem of having a prime minister who doesn't seem to care about trying to reach people who disagree with him in a kind of way. And this is a fairly easy one to explain, which is you can't invade my country from your place. Do you want to do one more? Yes, sir. And then I'll come back here. And then I'll come to you. All right. The question is about the Iran deal, which Donald Trump he's constantly saying that he wants to get out of it. He could be bluffing. I mean, this is the whole, I'm a great deal maker and I'm going to scare you into... I mean, that said, the Iran deal to me, it's better having the Iran deal is better than not having the Iran deal in the following sense. If there is going to be a war between Iran and Israel, and I hope there won't be, obviously, in the coming months or year, we know to a certainty that it won't be a nuclear war, and that has to count for something. And the Iran deal has stopped the Iranians from making forward progress on their nuclear program. It doesn't mean that it stops them forever, and it doesn't mean that they're not getting some benefits from the Iran deal. But I would say that those people, including people around Donald Trump who say that this wasn't the best deal in the world, are probably right. I mean, I covered the making of the Iran deal, and there was this feeling that I had on occasion that American negotiators took the position of a person who walks into a car dealer and announces, "I'm not leaving here without a car," and the dealer saying, "Okay, we can make that happen." And so this is not to endorse the art of the deal, and it's not to endorse the idea that anyone could do it better, because this is tough stuff. But I've always been uneasy with the Iran deal because it carved out just the nuclear piece. I understand why I did it, but Iran is considered by the United States, the Obama administration and the Trump administration, to be the primary state sponsor of terrorism in the world, the main state sponsor of terror. And it would have been nice if they could have dealt with some of that as well. So I'm not going to guess what's going to happen on May 7th when this has to be recertified. Pulling out seems crazy in the sense that it is actually at this moment working. So why would you bust out something that is working? There's all kinds of other things you could do to be tough on Iran without pulling out of it. Anyway, the agreement, just because we pull out doesn't mean the agreement is abrogated. The Europeans are still in the agreement, and Iran is technically still in the agreement. We just look, I think we'll look like a country that doesn't take its obligations seriously. And if I were the North Korean dictator, and I'm not, but if I were, I would look at that and say, oh, you want me to make a nuclear deal, but when you get bored with your nuclear deals, you change president, you're just going to walk away from it, and so I'm going to be left holding the bag. It doesn't make a lot of sense, even at this moment. What Donald Trump hates most about the Iran deal is that it was made by Barack Obama. I mean, it's not, to me, that's not complicated. Wait, I just pointed at someone else. Yes, sir.
We occupied Vietnam, we were told we left the communists to overrun it, and now it's a tourist destination.
Still communist.
You said if you leave Afghanistan, the Russians will come in and take it over.
No, I didn't say Afghanistan. No, but I didn't say specifically Afghanistan. I said that I said the Russians would gain influence in Europe. What's so bad? Because they're murderous thugs who killed half the country in Afghanistan, and they're terrible, terrible, terrible people. And from a moral perspective, I'd rather give Afghanistan a shot. I mean, I'm still not. I'm much more of a foreign policy realist, quote unquote, and understand the limitations of America. No, and look, on the Afghanistan question in particular, it's sort of anybody who goes into Afghanistan, please have a good time. You're going to get killed. It's as a particular issue. But we have a more basic problem in that, which is, do you really want to wholly leave Afghanistan and let it devolve to what it was before 2001, when Al-Qaeda could sit in Afghanistan in peace and tranquility and plan 9/11? These are the difficult questions. The real question is, how do you protect yourself? It is true, as a maxim, it's true that if you fight them there, your chances are lower that you have to fight them here. This is why I've always been a critic of the TSA, not because of the TSA, because if you believe that these moderately poorly people in bright blue shirts are going to stop an Al-Qaeda or ISIS plot against our airliners that has already reached the airport, that it hasn't been stopped at any of the points along the way, you're kidding yourself. You know what I mean? So my general theory is if the guys have already reached the airport and have figured out a way to take down an airline, the TSA, no matter the sharpest TSA agent in the world, is not going to stop that. So it is true that you want to stop it over there. But what does being over there mean? Donald Trump wants to bring everybody out from Syria right now because he's been told, or he believes, that ISIS has been defeated, going back to that other question. But, the hard thing for Americans is patience, in a kind of way. Barack Obama made a key mistake. Obviously, Donald Trump is making the same mistake now, of telling our enemies when we're leaving. You never tell your enemy when you're going to leave. They'd let them guess if you're going to leave at all. And so we're going to be fighting this for a very, very long time, and it's better to have, there has to be some middle ground between pulling yourself back entirely and in launching a ground invasion of a Middle East country that is essentially impossible to occupy. And so that's the dilemma for any president, trying to find a middle ground between George W. Bush, kind of, let's just occupy the whole country and see what we can do, and Barack Obama, who believes that everything is a slippery slope and we shouldn't go near anything because it's all going to be a disaster. It's the fundamental dilemma, and I have sympathy for any president who has to do. I don't know why anybody would want the job for any number of reasons, but that's one main reason to have sympathy for them, because these are not problems with actual solutions. Yeah.
It's 6 something.
Oh, okay. Oh, we didn't know. Thank you.
We could stay here all night, and there would be lots more questions.
These are
but-
great questions, Byron. Thank you. These are really great questions. I really appreciate it.
Well, we
Really
thank you,
excellent.
and I just want to thank Bill and Lynn Foggle and Josh Weiss for chairing the event. And next year, sometime. Thank you. It was really great.
Good summer.
Yeah, it was great. You were this way.
No, this is the part of the speeches that where people come with more questions.
I know, but
And then you know the favorite one. I'm sure you've heard this one. The favorite one is, how come you didn't talk about? And you know the answer is because I exist in the time-space continuum.
right, well,
I only have so many.
someone's going to smack me for stopping it, but I just knew.
No. End it before people get. We've been wanting a little. I mean, it's an hour and a half. It's long.
I'm just going to get my keys, and then I'm happy to just get my office when I leave.
Okay, yeah, whisk away. And you want me, can I drive and follow you to where we're
sure,
going? How far away is it?
It's like 10 minutes.
I'm in the parking lot, so I'll just find it.
I know you have a lot of fans, but this is a fan letter about your grandma Ida. I'm Deborah Srolick. I'm married to Hal Lewis. So,
Wait, do you guys live here?
yes.
Where is
In Long Meadow. Hal is shooting right now, shooting, film shooting.
I understand.
In North Carolina. But I
that's
told
great.
him I was coming.
You guys
and-
live up here?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's so great.
Yeah,
Wow, I haven't
Yeah.
seen you in years. I mean, since
yeah.
since they both left us. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, I just am a big fan of.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you so
Yes.
much. Well, I'll tell my mom. That,
Please do.
I know that.
Yes, Dick passed, and then Marilyn.
Marilyn Lynn, I know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Dick
When
passed
did Marilyn?
first. Last May, almost.
Very-
yeah,
very
just last
just now.
May. Yeah, just
She
now.
made it quite far.
She did. She.
I remember
yeah.
growing up.
Do.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And then she was like,
Yeah. My
She was
husband
named Pat was the other
did
one, but,
to the last minute. The
How long
pledge
did
was
you-
like that. 30 years.
30, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I
You
knew
in touch
everybody.
with Nancy?
Yes.
Oh, say hi.
Yeah,
for
I
me.
definitely will. I definitely
Yeah,
will.
her kids must all be home.
Everybody's all
Everybody's
grown
grown
up.
up.
Everybody is, and everybody's doing great.
That's good.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
It's so nice of you to
I
come.
just wanted to tell you,
Thanks
don't
so
leave without,
much.
don't
Don't
leave
leave.
without Bill Foggle.
No.
Because he's going to escort you in
Oh,
your
okay.
car.
Oh, he's coming to my car. Hi.
Question.
Sure.
My name is Cyrus Linson, and I'm clearly a Democrat.
It's not clear. Maybe you
But my question.
put one of the red hats on. You don't know.
During the election, the run for the election, the media had Trump on all the time.
It was a show.
It was a show, and we
Not the
believe,
media. Not the media. CNN and a couple of TV stations.
but that's what America gets. And to what extent do you believe that the media is responsible?
There is no the media. There's a million companies that do a million different things. It's like saying when BP spills oil in the Gulf of Mexico, do you blame the energy industry or do you blame BP?
Well,
I mean, I
get
get that. I mean, so
right, well,
I blame
let's
CNN.
talk-
I blame CNN. I do to some degree. They treated it like a and it was. But here's the thing. Remember that these stations, these networks, wouldn't do it if a lot of people didn't watch it. And people love the show.
Yes.
And so, like you're talking about, is not to excuse anything, but you're talking about human nature. So,
About that. But the
Donald Trump
media
is
in a
entertaining.
democracy has a role to play. And I think that we're very responsible. This is where we get our face-to-face news.
These are companies that
And
operate.
so going forward, is there, it's the same thing.
If they can make money doing this, they'll do it. Sad, but it's
It
true.
is sad. So who's going to risk it?
Mr. Goldberg, thank you for coming to the committee. What is your impression of what the government of the United States has to do with South America, especially Venezuela? Is it looking like a democracy seems like an extracurricular activity right now. You know what I mean? Thank you very much. I just was wondering if you had
No, I don't know. I didn't
any idea.
I see. So much fun.
Good to see you. I'm Richard Halpern. Try to grab you first. I'm Larry Mackler. I have one question. The Iran deal, this administration wanted for widening. Doesn't that, with Iran being a major sponsor of terrorism, doesn't that trigger the Middle East conflict with the alignment of Russia and Iran in terms of putting the Middle East on notice that there's going to be activity, and also potentially releasing terrorist cells in this country? Because it sounds to me like Iran is the center of real problems, major problems. So I would think Trump would stay the hell away from that and not try to even consider unwinding that deal.
Yeah, but you just used the word think.
Don't use the word think. I guess you're right. Yeah. I got one quick question. I'm 90 years old. Lived through a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. Do you think the anti-Semitic, as you go around the country, an anti-Semitic feeling, say, it's like under German term? This was terrible. You think it's worse now?
I think it's bad on the margins, but I think the country is still pretty accepting of Jews. I hope I'm right. I hope I'm right.
And I enjoy the Atlantic.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
It's been a long time reading.
Oh, good for you. Thank you.
I'm going to go this way.
You need a hand? You all right?
You got it, Larry?
You okay,
Yep,
Larry?
I'm all right. I just want to say two things. One, I very much enjoyed this. The fact that you put tours was great. The other part is,
You're who's dad?
Becky.
Oh, you're
Becky's dad.
You're Becky's dad.
Becky's
Oh,
dad. My wife was here before.
Oh, yeah,
She said hello. I'm Becky's dad. I just wanted to say hello.
Oh my goodness. I love this.
Do
Do you know Becky well?
Yeah.
She's one of the great Jewish leaders of our day. She is. That program is amazing. That's great. We just saw her son. Yeah. That program is really amazing. These kids. I mean, my kids are in it, so I shouldn't like.
My nieces are, they're terrific kids.
They pick terrific kids and they go on. And she really owns that program.
Oh my God. It would be like 47 kids and like 45 of them were like phenomenal.
I know. I don't even know how she does that because they had 200 plus or something like kids this year for 26 spots. And it's really was.
Can I risk your life?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm just going to say again.
Yeah,
pleasure.
good to meet you. Yeah, sure.
Since 1976.
It's changed a little. You know what you should read right now? No.
I'll figure it out when you answer.
No. It's just coming out now. Yossi Klein Levy's book called
Letters to my
Letter to My Palestinian Neighbor. It's actually, he's a friend of mine.
Yes, he was just here 2 weeks ago.
Oh, at this show? Oh, good. Speaking of the book, or he's not?
Yeah. What he's doing.
Read this book. It's interesting. It's actually, I mean, the secret is it's not really addressing. It's addressing the Palestinians, but it's an explanation of his centrist views on Israel, and it'll give you a good. It's not long. You can do it.
I have it.
You can be on the plane. You could read it, and you still get a long nap.
The other book, if you look at history, though, is Danny Gordis' History of Israel. It's dense. It's hard reading.
It's sort of pain in the neck. I mean, it depends on if you want to sort of bear
Yossi's
down
book
on
is
it.
good, though.
Yossi's book is really good, but you can don't give it to her. Let her buy it on Amazon. Help Yossi. Help Yossi a little bit. Hi. Oh, thanks very much.
I was wondering, you didn't speak much about Russia and the implications of if Trump basically is so nervous about angering Russia and that Russia being thugs and dictators and autocrats and oligarchs, that if they also have control of what we do as well, and where this upward is going to like seems suggested.
You know, I mean, this whole presidency could end if we actually found proof. But by the way, it's like the world's worst. I mean, it's like one of these ridiculous TV shows. Can you imagine?
Every
No, I mean, like the
episode,
Americans, like,
suffering
or
war.
Homeland. It feels like Homeland. Like, wait, the Russians actually put a guy in the presidency? Like most TV shows would be like, come on.
But then you even have the question, like, why the lawyer then now wants to say that she was actually involved. Is that some part of their agenda to like put it up in front of his face that says, you know what?
I'm not that far into the rabbit hole, but
You can travel right down.
what? Yeah, no. There's an interesting story there. What does it mean if Russia put Trump in power? Did Russia put Trump in power? Can you imagine? What craziness. We're really in a crazy. Should we go?
Yeah,
Bill
Bill
will-
actually, his wife took the car, so he's gonna go. with
Okay,
you.
go then.
And then I'll tell you where you're going.
Okay. All right.